Today we'll be talking about the Haida M7 filter holder system. Welcome back to the channel everyone, and welcome back to Gear Shorts. This is Dylan Goldby. Today we'll be looking at the Haida M7 filter system and how I make use of it. Last week we talked about Nissi's filter system for the X100 series, and I mentioned that it can't be used with the conversion lenses or other lenses and bodies. So the M7 is my go-to filter system when I'm using more than just the X100V. When I travel personally, for example on my recent cross-country cycling trip, I will usually take the X100V, the two conversion lenses, an XT body, and my long zoom, which is the 55 to 200mm. With that small bag of gear, along with the Haida M7 and my small Jitso Traveler tripod, I can focus a lot more on traveling, cycling, enjoying the scenery, than on carting around a bag of gear. So unlike the Nissi kit, with this kit you actually attach a separate filter holder to an adapter ring. Now Haida provides adapter rings for everything up to a 67mm filter thread, so it's useful for, say, small primes on a full frame system, or some of the lenses that you'll find on the Fujifilm system or a Micro Four Thirds system. Haida provides a nice hardshell case with the filter holder itself, and you can actually store a couple of the adapter rings in here as well. So let's take a look at attaching this to, for example, the X100V with the teleconversion lens. So the first thing to do is to take an adapter ring, in this case 67mm, and screw it into the front filter thread of the lens. Once that's attached, you can take the filter holder itself and, using this handy little red tab here, just clip it over the front of the adapter ring. And once that's on, you can insert square filters into the front of the filter holder. And one of my favorite things about the Haida holders actually is that you can take out this, what they call a light barrier here, take this out, and in the back here you can actually attach a drop-in filter as well. So we'll take a look at those in a moment. Unlike the holder, the filters actually come in these small metal tins, and these are great for protecting your filters, but once you've got 2 or 3 filters in your bag, they can become quite bulky. So I recommend picking up a pouch like the one that I use, which is the Mindshift Filter Nest Mini. And in here I can actually store the 4 filters that I use most often with this kit. So in here I keep my 3-stop graduated filter, my drop-in CPL filter, my 6-stop drop-in ND filter, and my square 10-stop filter. And this covers most of my shooting when I'm in the field, but I would like to add a couple of extra graduated filters to this kit. As I mentioned, the drop-in filters are one of the main features of this system, so let's take a look at the CPL. So first we remove the light barrier, and in place of that we can actually just drop this CPL filter down the back here. Now the great thing about that is the CPL has this nice little gear on top, so you can actually turn that to change your polarization, but that doesn't affect the rotation of the filter holder itself. So if you have something like this graduated filter in here, and you have that aligned to, let's say, the horizon like that, but then your polarization is off, you can actually just turn the little screw on the top here, the little gear on the top here, and that will rotate your polarizer independently of everything else. So these two little pouches, while slightly bigger than the Nissi kit we looked at last week, offer a lot more flexibility when you're working with something more than just the X100 camera. So let's jump in and take a look at a few images that I've made with this set. This first frame was very simple. I'd just finished shooting the sunrise on Kawaguchiko, looking across the lake at Mount Fuji, and I was walking along the shore back to our accommodation with my wife when I spotted these reeds blowing in the wind. That gave the sense of exactly how we were feeling that day. The temperatures were a little above zero and there was a bit of a wind blowing, so I wanted to capture an image that sort of represented our experience. The sun was still low in the sky to the left of the image, and so I decided to make use of the CPL filter first. What this would do is, once dialed in, take the blues of the sky to a bit of a deeper shade, and also take the edge off the highlights on the snow on the mountain. What it didn't do was extend my shutter speed long enough to be able to see a little bit of motion in those reeds. So after I'd made a few images, I felt that they didn't really convey what I was seeing, which was that, or convey what I was feeling, which was that wind blowing the reeds around. So I decided to add my 10-stop filter in front of the CPL, and what that did was give me a shutter speed of around 5 seconds and allow those reeds to move during the exposure. I feel like that really conveys what I was feeling more than a simple snapshot would. This second frame is from a sunrise shoot on Jeju Island. This view is from the coast nearby Sage Harbor, looking back towards Sanbangsan, the mountain in the background. The challenges I faced here were a significantly brighter sky, some wet rocks in the foreground, and of course, the unpredictable waves. So I decided to first deal with the sheen on the rocks, and the way to do that is to take a CPL filter, in this case the drop-in CPL filter, and dial that in until the reflections on the rocks start to disappear. Once that was done, I still had to deal with the sky that was a lot brighter than my foreground. Now, this is normal with a sunrise, but I really wanted to have detail in the foreground as well as in the sky. So I chose to use my 3-stop graduated ND filter. Now, there is a school of thought that says, well, our modern cameras have really good dynamic range. Why not just use that and fix this in post? But I still like to get my images as close to finished as I can in camera. The next issue that I wanted to deal with was the unpredictable waves. They were quite small and not particularly interesting, so I decided I wanted to blur them, but still retain a little bit of texture in them. So in this case, because I was shooting before sunrise, a 10-stop filter would have given me a couple of minutes of exposure and removed all texture from the water. So I decided to use the internal ND filter on the X100. At that time I was using the X100F, so that was a 3-stop filter. And that took my exposure out to about 6.5 seconds, which still allowed me to retain a little bit of texture in the water while removing those sort of ugly waves that were curving their way through the scene. For this final example, I wanted to do a really long exposure during the daytime, so I stacked a couple of ND filters together. This was made on day 4 of my cross-country cycling trip. I'd arrived in Daegu City a little bit earlier than I expected, so I stopped in a park just outside of the city where I could see this building that they call the Arc. This is a place where a lot of locals come to hang out in the afternoons, so I made a few pictures of people walking around the Arc, but then I decided that I wanted to make a long exposure because we had some really nice clouds in the sky. So in order to get a long exposure during the day, you do need a lot of stops of ND. So this is one more use for the rear slot on the Haida M7, and in this case I took my 6-stop drop-in ND and I put that in the back, and then I took my 10-stop and put it in front of that. Now, Haida's filters don't have much of a color cast, so it's not really an issue if you want to stack 2 or 3 filters together. What that does give you is a lot of light stopping power, and I was able to take my shutter speed from a 500th of a second all the way out to 4 minutes. That allowed for a few things. The first is, of course, the streaky clouds in the sky. The second was a little bit of a rest for my legs, and the third was a cup of coffee while I waited. So I hope you've enjoyed this discussion of the Haida M7 kit and the way that I use it in my travel work. If you have any questions about what we've discussed today, please feel free to leave them below. I've also put links to all this gear down below, so if you're interested in picking any of it up for yourself, you can do that there. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Take care.